Greg and Richard right here on Talking Red.
Hello there and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. I'm your host, Greg Oram, along with my fellow Forest fanatic from across the Atlantic, Richard Spray.
Ready, go!
Richard, good day to you. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, I'm all right. Hanging in there.
Good
Beautiful.
stuff.
Yeah, got me wild and excited. That little intro there.
We're not live today. We are doing a pre-recorded special because this is something that we're bringing to you based entirely around the financial side of football and the implications that different outcomes could have on Nottingham Forest when it comes to financial fair play within the game. Of course, all Forest fans are aware that falling foul of the rules can pose significant headaches. Losing 4 points under PSR rules nearly cost us our Premier League place a year ago. And whilst we all agree that the rules definitely seem skewed in favour of the more established Premier League clubs, Forest and their fans will be acutely aware of how vital increased revenue is for the growth of the club. Now, with us to lead on this episode is a regular contributor to Talking Reds, but what perhaps many of you won't know is that he is in fact an expert when it comes to financial analysis. He has developed his own sports finance software that's possibly on the cusp of breaking into the industry as we speak. You all know him. Here he is. It's Raf The Random Pundit. How are we doing, buddy? Good to have you with us, Raf. And we're leaning into your expertise here. And as I said in the intro, everyone obviously recognizes you from all the times you're with us. But you are an expert when it comes to this. You're not just some fan who's pulling figures out of thin air. We're actually really lucky to have you to take us through something you put together. So just tell everybody a little bit briefly about your background to kind of underline that, you know, you are coming to us as a bit of an expert, and then you've got something special to take us through, haven't you?
Yeah, no, I do, guys. Look, honestly, I love being on here, and I love being able to give back a bit of something that's probably a bit out of the ordinary, but something that I get increasing chatter on Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter, about kind of finances and other bits and pieces. But yeah, my background, other than the fact of being a Forest fan, but my actual job per se, as an intern, I joined Deloitte, the accountancy firm, and then they offered me a job, and I stayed for 22 years at Deloitte. My background, my base training was as a chartered accountant, and I am now a fellow of the ICAW. Chartered accountants, amongst other things, wrote rules for them and other bits and pieces. So I left Deloitte about 18 months ago. The Random Pundit was born, of other things that I was then interested in and doing. But at the core of my skill set, along with software development and other bits and pieces, which I did for the last 5 years of my time at Deloitte, with FTSE 100 companies and other things like that, it is really around finance and accountancy and analysis and data and other things like that, which has got me to where I am now with my own company in sports finance and software, which is all at the cutting edge, all very exciting, lots of conversations at the highest echelons of football at the moment, which I cannot talk about, unfortunately. But what I can say is Richard has had a glimpse of what I do last night. So it does exist. It is a tangible thing that is out there. And that's what we are leveraging to give us a bit more insight than just looking at what are pretty opaque and unhelpful financial accounts.
Amazing. Richard, as Raf just touched on, you managed to get a sneak kind of preview with him. And for someone like me who relies a lot on the experts when it comes to the financials and all that kind of stuff. Us general layman fans possibly think we know a bit more when it comes to PSR and rules, but we probably don't. I think we've learned fancy words like amortization, and we know a little bit more, I suppose, about one or two things, but it is a bit of a minefield, isn't it? I mean, you really need an expert head when it comes to looking at the figures and how it all adds up, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm kind of one of those guys who not a trained accountant, I have a business, I have a master's in business administration and with a focus on analysis, but it's not anywhere to the level that Raf's got, what he's got going on at the moment. But I will tell you that in the business world, and you guys have probably heard this as well, the whole concept of speed to action, right? Being able to access information and make tangible decisions off that, actualize things from that data is critical. And so what I loved about what he shared with me last night, it's a speed to action system. You can get understanding of certain things within that decision-making process as a football club, as a business, to understand how to make, critical decisions from it. And we all know, as you pointed out, man, goodness gracious, we tangibly understand exactly what the impact can be if you don't follow the rules. So, having something like what Raf's got, I think it'll make a huge difference to the industry.
Okay. So for this episode, Raf, you're going to focus on the financial side of things when it comes to Nottingham Forest. We're a Nottingham Forest podcast. So you've put together something to help us understand it a bit more, perhaps, and what certain outcomes might mean. So the floor is yours, sir.
Indeed. Just before we kick off with the slides, we've got just a couple of things, a couple of thank yous and other bits and pieces, but I really have to start with the unbelievable news about Taiwo. As we sit here on Thursday, just past noon, the great news is his family is with him. He's got through surgery, which all looks like it is successful. There weren't negative things that came out of the surgery, and he is awake, out of his induced coma. And so it looks like he's got a long road of recovery ahead of him, but there's positivity there that he is on that road to recovery. So speaking for myself, lots of other people, the entire Twitter feed was just about Taiwo. Forget anything else. We're all behind him, his recovery, and I'm so pleased the fact that he looks like he will fully recover. We really, really, really hope. So just best wishes with him.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and the other things are just a few thank yous. I was at Leicester on Sunday. You have had Premier Elliott on as one of your last visitors onto the pod. He brilliantly got me some fantastic tickets in Clough Upper, which was where we were for that game. Really great. And I promised him I'd give one random stupid fact, which he absolutely loves. They're not stupid, they're brilliant. But the Captain Birdseye individual and the actor, beloved Fish Fingers, that actor actually gets chronically seasick. There you go. So that's one of the facts I promised that I would tell the next time that I was on. And thank you so much again, Elliot, for sorting me out with tickets and being such an amazing host. That was really, really good. For this content that we've got, there's a huge thanks again to my partner in crime, Danscape, who has done some of the analysis, which will probably be a follow-on piece to this, around revenues that get generated out of different European competitions. We'll touch on it, but Dan will do something a bit more in detail on that. And then also my other partner in crime on Twitter, helping to answer some of these PSR questions with the fan base and things like that, Jim, who like for the last couple of years, he's had that really good brain to go underneath the hood of the accounts with me, and we chat about lots of things and theory casts. So thanks to them, because you know what, everything is better in a team. So I haven't done this all by myself.
Excellent. So you have a slideshow.
We do. And look, there's lots of information in here, but I've tried to highlight the key bits on each slide. But what I thought would be a lovely thing is just to quickly start on the health of the club generally before we get into PSR, but also what we now know, because the last season's accounts dropped not that long ago. All the press got hold of them. There was absolutely holding hands and singing songs, as apparently we were all good through PSR. And there was even a profit that was mentioned for last year. We haven't heard those words in I don't know how long at Forest. So it all seemed like things were really brilliant. So I thought we'd just quickly look at actually how brilliant things are and the direction of travel that we're going in. What you've got here for those that are watching, and those I will say with those that are listening as well, I'll explain it, is that we've got different aspects of finance that come from the accounts. And we've got 2 seasons ago and we've got 1 season ago. So the first year that we're in the Premier League back again, and last year, the second year that we were in Premier League, right? So revenue, which is the key kind of kicker that we've got that drives so much, and when we get to squad cost ratio will be so important, that actually improved by about 23%, which is really good. But in context, admin expenses, right, and that actually bundles pretty much everything other than interest in there. Forest do it differently from other clubs. Again, not helpful when you look across lots of different clubs and try and compare them, because it's not apples with apples. Actually, that increased by slightly more, about another 0.5%. So not only do we have the expenses going up fractionally more than the revenue, in actual just numbers that we have, not percents, administrative expenses are bigger than revenue by about 30% by the actual size of them. So the actual amount that expenses have gone up is more. They've gone up by 50 million, whereas revenue has only gone up by 35 million, for example. So we actually are a bit on the back foot, even though we've recorded a profit. And we'll come on to why and how that happened in a little bit. Now, something else that we've actually got a slide on that I'm going to explain a bit more is debt interest. Anyone that follows me on Twitter knows the fact I am poking quite a lot of fun at Man United at the moment, just because they are an absolute basket case of a club, financially destroyed to their core. I'm very worried that Forest don't go down the same road. And if we have a look at this, the debt interest has actually increased 50% over those 2 years, from 10 million to 15 million pounds that we're paying every year in interest. Okay, I'll come on to explain a little bit more of that later on. But good news, dividends. The directors are not taking, the owners are not taking dividends. Director pays come down 32% over those 2 years. So governance is good in terms of not bleeding the system like we see at Man U and other clubs as well. Attendance is up, like 1,400 people on average every single game up. Gate receipts are up 32%, right? We've got 11 million to 14.5 million. I have not put a tick or a cross next to that. It is a very, very emotive topic that is there. But you can see, compared to all these numbers, an increase of 3.5 million. Is that really worth it in terms of that the numbers of the fan base that cannot renew their season tickets and now cannot come to games? But that is a topic for another time. Now we get into the really interesting things, and these are the things that we need to focus if we're going to grow as a club, right? Media, in terms of actually our rights of what's on television, that increased by 5 million, up 4% to 130 million. Merchandising increased 21%. So we've gone from 7 to 8.5 million. That probably needs to grow a bit more. Other commercial, this is the key, right? Commercial activity. This is how we are going to take the next step as a club, and that has gone up. It's been really good. It's gone up 163% from 8 million to 21 million. And actually, to put this in context, I was talking to Rich about this. The clubs that we really think we should probably be trying to emulate, not in terms of transfer strategy of the Brightons, but in terms of, you know, now that we're trying to get Europe more consistently and break into that top 6, the Villas and the Newcastles are who we really should be comparing ourselves to from a financial clout perspective. And actually, if you take commercial, which is merchandising and other commercial, and again, trying to compare like for like across their accounts, we last season were on a par with Villa in terms of our commercial activity. Now, Newcastle dwarfed it. They had about 80 million for their commercial to our about 30 million. So there's a huge amount to do there. But here's the key thing. If we go back to the first year we were in the Premier League, now before Newcastle got into Europe, before Villa got into Europe, Villa's commercial was 17 million. And bear in mind the fact that we're on 30 before we've got into Europe. Newcastle's 44, so it was still better than ours. But we are in the right ballpark if we can get into Europe and be very sensible and commercialize very well. We'll talk about new stadiums and the commercial side of that growing as well. But, you know, we're not floundering way behind the competitors that we've got within this space, but there's still work to be done. And for some reason, the formatting has gone a bit weird and we've got some squishies underneath here. But I know what that says, and I'll read it to you in a second. But the other aspect in squad cost ratio that we need to boost are related party sales. Okay, now this is the grey area that Man City use a lot, and there's been a lot of speculation around this type of area. But this is where Marinakis has basically been buying up restaurants and other things like that are on the spectrum. There are other businesses that are related party sales. So there's sales that are going on between linked clubs, and you just need to count the revenue for squad cost ratio. And we have massively, in percentage terms, increased that from 1 million to 4.1 million. But I'd watch that figure, because if you want to work between the lines to get us into squad cost ratio, you might see some bizarre acquisitions by Marinakis, and it might be helping within that area to boost that number. So the other thing that we looked at, and I looked at the payouts that were last year as an indication for this year, because we are going to finish not 17th, which is absolutely wonderful. We are going to be finishing in the top 7. But what does that mean in terms of finances as well? So that revenue line, and that revenue line is going to get boosted from the 190. But how much is it going to get boosted? Well, if we finish third, we probably get a boost of around 48 million quid, right? Which is awesome. Finish 4th or 5th, that's about 40 million quid more that we get in. I have had to update this slide deck as of the last couple of weeks for now 7th position. But for 7th position, that is probably about 30 million quid that we're going to get on top of it. Now, this is by far the most dense of all of the decks, is to set the scene. But that is roughly the foundations of the club in terms of finances. Okay, so you get an idea of roughly where we are. Team, have you got any questions that you want to ask at this stage of all these bits and pieces? Or should we just crack on with a bit more look at a deep dive into a little bit of the worrying debt situation and a few other things?
Yeah, good. Move on to the next one.
Cool. All right. Okay. So first of all, as you know, this season, if we're trying to understand this season, it wouldn't be Forest if we didn't have a load of players leaving and a load of players coming back in again, right? Okay. So you can see all the players on here. So for those that are listening, who came in over this season, this season we've got Anderson, Milenkovic, Sosa, Morato, Jota, Miguel, Moriera, Moreno, Ward-Prowse, Carmo but loaned out, Stamanic but loaned out, Bindon but loaned out. Okay. Then who left? Niakate, Mangala, Vlach, Worrell, Frula. We actually had McKenna, Arta, eventually, out. Yeah, Mbeso, Aguilera, Maiton, Huang, Kiate, and Felipe as well, who then retired. So there was quite a lot of movement, which, when we're now having a look at the finances for this year, means the fact that the wage bill has massively shifted around, and the amortization figures for player purchases and agency fees and other things like that has also shifted around. Now, this is the bit that the system was used for the most, to try and model. Now, saying this, I can only use public data for my system to do public things like this. Okay. Now, using an approximation I've worked with a football agent as well, I've got the amortization for known years to within about just under 1 million wiggle room, using massive assumptions about agency fees, signing bonuses, and other things that are out there that we will never know in the public domain. So it works within about 1 million quid of what we're talking with here, right? So what we've got in wages from last year to this year, wages have gone up by 9 million quid for this financial year that we are going to get to the end to in June. Okay. But we will also have, I imagine, increase in bonuses that are paid out, because we have done outrageously well this year compared to last year. So bonuses are probably going to go up. Amortization has also gone up. Okay. So that's, again, for amortization, for anyone that, just a very quick explanation, when you buy a player, all of that cost does not hit your financial accounts for that year. You can spread that cost equally over the length of the contract and release the cost in equal chunks over those years of the contract as effectively losses onto your account, up to a maximum of 5 years. So we can see it's pretty much gone up 20 million quid for the last 3 years. It's gone from 40 to 60, and this year it looked like it's going to be 80. Okay, so that is another 20 million quid that we need to find money for. Okay, so that's a bit of the squad movement, and what does that mean? And that's what we get quite a lot of questions on Twitter about as well, about buying new players, and we'll come on to how much new players cost when we start filtering them into this. So now, this is the elephant in the room, and lots of people I've been trying to explain this to on Twitter, which is again one of the reasons why we're doing this pod. Now, last year we came up, and there was very good publicised. We made £12 million profit, right, for the 23-24 last season. But there's a reason why we made that profit, and it isn't good reading, unfortunately. So we effectively made 116 million quid of extra revenue in one-offs. 100.5 of that was profit on player sales. So you think Brennan Johnson, think Mangala, think Niakate, think those players, right? We also, which was awesome business and massive tick to Marinakis in the recruitment team, we made 15.5 million quid in loan fees, like the Mangala loan and other things that are out there. That is a huge chunk of change. So although I'm going to be a bit of a doomer here, that was fantastic last year of what they did financially. But the issue is again, that is a one-off. So we've got a bit of an issue in the fact that we've got 116 million quid that got us to the 12 million quid profit last year that we don't get to use again this year. So you can see the actual general foundations of Forest finances are not in a good place. They're not in a good place, right? We are having to, which we know, we're a selling club to basically keep afloat at the moment, which is what we did last season. We'll come on to, do we still have to be a selling club for this year's PSR, next year's PSR in a bit? But another thing that I want to really highlight is the Man U problem. Now, a lot has been made out of the fact that they still owe so much in basically for players they already have, and still in installments still owe a whole lot of money. We have that same problem. We actually owe 184 million pounds, right? This was as at the end of last season, last set of accounts that go to June 24. Okay, we owe 184 million pounds for players we already have, but we have not fully paid off yet to the clubs that we bought them for. Now, the good news is that we are owed 115 million pounds, which is good, but you can see the difference between the two, and that is a liability, right? That's not good. 60% more that we owe out than what is in that is coming in. Now, the good news is this is all cash flow, right? The actual purchases that we've made and everything else as well, all of that is all been factored and baked into the profit side of things already. This is a cash flow issue, and we've seen Marinakis will sort that for us, right? So don't be too worried about this. As you can see, Marinakis pumped in last year a load of money, and then he converted 82 million pounds right at the end of June 24 into shares. That brings the amount of shareholding up to just over 2 million quid in the club. But if you think that he just put in 82 million, he got new at the end of June, you can see the fact of how much Marinakis is behind this club and how much money he is pumping into this club to keep it going and bring us like a phoenix rising up through the ashes and reflame effectively at the moment. But historically, this club cumulatively has lost just a little bit over 300 million quid through its operations aggregated over time. Okay, this is what Marinakis is fighting and trying to get us to a stable, profitable position that we're in. Okay, I thought that was important because this really talks about the history of the club and what we're inheriting and what we're bringing forward, that we're not just going and be able to buy any single player that we want. It's all rosy. These are things that we still need to fix. Okay, so if we move forward a little bit, this is very quickly on the loans. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. You can, for those that are watching, you can read this at your heart's content. For those that are listening, the idea behind this is, remember I said that we were owed 115 million pounds for players that we've sold that we haven't got the cash for yet. To help cash flow, because At the end of the year, last year in June 24, we had £29,000 as cash in the bank. That is it. Right? We had an overdraft at the bank of 11 million quid. Right? But they tried to release some cash flow by effectively taking some loans in, 61 million quid's worth of loans and refinancing of some old loans to get more money into the club for cash flow. Okay. Now, the interesting thing here is this is not Marinakis putting in money. These are loans with third parties. Now, here we've got interest rates of nearly 15% on some of these things. Okay. So this is not cool by any stretch of the imagination. We've seen interest payments have gone from 10 to 15. We really can't get them spiraling out of control, right? I think from looking at the accounts, I'm guessing that Marinakis only has about 10 million quid's worth of loans still in the club. The rest are external loans. And I think we've probably got debt of about 146 million as of when the last accounts were released. And it's not just the 30th of June. They let you into a little bit more of the next period before they actually publish the accounts. So I think probably around about Christmas, we probably had about 146 million pounds worth of debt. Okay. But the good news is debt is coming down because debt was at about 190 million quid before Marinakis converted 82 million of it. So we're down, we're trending down, which is good. But if we run out of cash, Marinakis could pump more money in. Now, what I generally think is that 15 million quid, I think less loans, but they're more expensive. So working them out and crunching all the numbers, they actually come out pretty much on the nose of as expensive as each other. So it'll probably be 15 million quid again, as long as we don't need to take out more loans through this year that we haven't heard about or seen, or Marinakis pumping in more loans. If so, we might see that number grow even further from 15. If he's having to put in another 50 to 60 million quid like he did last year, that's another 2 to 3 million pounds. Because again, rules are that can't be interest free. Everton tried that, got their hands massively slapped. Can't do that. Okay. It's got to be at commercial rates that the money's going in. I don't think it needs to be 15%, which is why Marinakis's loans are cheaper than some of these other ones. But still, there's the balance. Now, that's a bit techie, but it's a really important point because if we don't fix this, we could be going the direction of Man U, which we don't want to be doing. Okay. So now we get into the cool stuff, which is now actually talking about PSR. This is what everyone's dialing into, is to find out what is the actual PSR situation for this season, Raf. What's going on? Okay, cool. So what do we know? The one silver lining of the hearings and the PSR fines that we had was they had to put into the public record what the actual PSR figures, not just the profit figures, were for the club. So we can reverse engineer and find out through the opaqueness of, we can't tell really all of it from the accounts, but we think we probably get back about 17 million quid. This is Jim helping me out with this one. About 17 million quid a year that we get back in PSR allowances. Now, this is money that we spend on the academy, money we spend on the women's team, money that we spend in the community, and also depreciation on fixed assets and things like that. As we found out, we cannot spend it on promotion bonuses, but that's a thing of the past anyway. Anyway, so we can add on 17 million quid to the actual financial profit or loss to get us to a better figure every single year. And that gets you to PSR. Now that might modify if we see big stadium builds, improving the academy, right? If you see these things in the headline, that number's going to grow in terms of the add backs that we get on the publicized profit or loss figure. But for this year, have there been any massive big moves and shakes? Not to my knowledge of anything that is a huge capex expenditure or anything that we've done massively in any of those pots. So I think it's probably mainstay about 17 or so million. We know that first year up, well, in the championship, 40 million pound loss PSR. First year up, 52.5 million pound PSR loss back in the Premier League. Last year, 12 million headline, add the 17 back on. We actually made PSR wise, probably 29 million quid PSR profit. Now, for last year, what does that mean inside PSR? I think that we are probably inside PSR of our allowable 83 million, because remember, we still have 1 year in the championship of a stingy amount of PSR allocation. And so we're probably about 20 million quid inside of the 83, which, fair play to us, that is easily inside. That is really, really, really good news. And we get now the full 105 whack. So that's really good. So actually, if we do the calc, know what the 2 years we know what the 2 years of we've been in the Premier League are from the calcs above. That means the fact that this year, about to finish, we can make an allowable loss of approximately 81.5 million quid. Okay. PSR loss, not profit, but PSR loss of 81.5 million quid. Now, if we take last year's 29 million, but we actually strip out all those one-off costs that I talked, the 116 million quid of sales and loans, that makes last year actually a loss, core loss, of 87 million quid. Now you can see instantly the problem that we have for this year. That 87 million pound loss last year, if everything all being equal without selling or anything else as well, any players, we are already behind where we need to be for PSR for this year. Okay. But we're going to move some things up and down. Okay. So where we are, all being equal, we are basically 5.5 million quid. This is why. This is the old slides. Right. These are not the new slides that I sent through. But we've got, when we... we'll work with it. Okay. There was one error that I put in here. So we have got about 5.5 million quid that we need to make up. Now, we know from the system and everything else as well, we've got 29 million quid as well, where wages and amortization have moved. And we might have more in terms of bonuses. Okay. So that's not ideal. And then we've got increased prize money, though, to counterbalance that. So I'm assuming we finish, say, 6th. That might be worth to us about 35 million quid. Okay. So we've got 35 million quid in, which is good. Another 29 million quid out, and we need to make up 5.5. So you can see we're about on the money. So if we move on to the next slide to really think about this, I actually think if you add those all together of what I've just said, I think that we're probably right on the line of PSR, literally on the line of PSR right now. Okay. But that doesn't take into consideration extra bonuses that we might need to pay that might drag us underneath the PSR threshold that we've got. Okay. Now, what I will say is, though, that we have had an amazing season. And even though our commercial numbers uptick massively in year 2 of being in the Premier League, hospitality might have been off the charts this year, for example, because everyone then wanted to come and watch the team because it was doing so well. There might be a hidden number that's in commercial and merchandising that might offset, say, 5 million extra, or maybe up to 5 million quid. I don't know. That might help offset some of those bonuses. The bonuses in my head, between 5 and 10 million quid, maybe. I don't know. Could be more. I don't know. The upside is, who saw this coming? In player contracts that aren't the new ones, did they really write in European qualification as bonuses? I think most of the bonuses were probably about not getting relegated. So without the transparency, we don't really know. But what we do know here is that we are going to be in the margins. And I think we might be on the line or slightly below the line. But what we do know is that we need to shift some fringe players anyway to bring in players. So the profit on shifting some of those fringe players, I would expect to get us over the line, but we need to sell them before the 30th of June. But I think we'll be quite close to the line. So I think it's a bit convoluted. So over to you, Rich, to ask some questions.
I just had a question. Yeah, because I know we talked about this a little bit too. So in a situation like that, right? I mean, you could, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of certain players potentially that we could shift before that June 30th. I know we spoke about Danilo as being someone who might be, I mean, kind of articulate or give your thoughts on that. I mean, as much as we love him, obviously he's so talented. He's still young. He still really has a lot of potential, and we know the injury. And what he's tried to endure to come back, fully from that. And we've seen him come back in a second half of the season or a latter part of a season and be brilliant. But obviously that's not going to happen this season because it doesn't look like he's going to play much before the end of the season. But just your thoughts around maybe someone like him. Would that be someone that maybe would be a possible person you'd move before June 30th?
So I literally just quickly flicked over to the system, pulled up the roster and pulled up Danilo. So we bought him for 17.5 million quid. By the end of this financial year, there's probably about 9.2 million quid's worth of the purchase price that's unamortized. I've had to guess using the model agency fees and signing bonuses. I reckon there's probably another 500,000 quid's worth. It might be less because he came over from Brazil. I've kind of broad brushed against the whole squad using a formula, so it might be less than 500,000 quid. But you're probably looking at not 9 to 9.5 million quid that needs to be covered before it turns into profit. So if you think about how much he could be sold for, Palmeiras are not flush with cash, but he was actually flying at the end of last season before he got injured, and he's not fully back yet. So actually he's got pretty good track record in terms of his performances before his season basically pretty much out. So he could go maybe somewhere in Europe for 20, maybe 15, 20. Now, if you do that, that gives you somewhere between, say, 5, 6 to 10. So in the range of 5 to 10 million quid that you'd probably make in terms of profit, which, given what we're talking about here, might be him alone is enough to get us on the right side of PSR if we're slightly over because we've had to pay out some mega bonuses, basically. Like Morgan Gibbs-White getting his England caps, like, for example, and stuff like that, and contingent payouts to other clubs and other things that have suddenly triggered this year.
We saw last year. Yeah. I wanted to jump in if I could. We saw last year that clubs worked together to get around PSR with the academy and with players going on the deadline on loan and how it can be reflected and amortized. The Elliot Anderson, Vlachodimos deal. We saw Mangala go on loan and then get sold. We saw Niakate get sold. I mean, the thought of Danilo going for 20 million in my head doesn't stack up. I think it's more likely to be 30 because I think clubs are going to be helping each other out again. I think they started doing it last year, Raf. We're going to see the same thing again, surely, this year, aren't we? We're going to see them a few more inflated prices and a little bit more back scratching.
I will have to give you my public accessed knowledge on this, and I would go, I've got to be really careful here. Yes, I do, but they will be not outrageous. And
there's going to be some help here and there, but I mean, I do
think so, and I think there will be. Look, if I'm doing this logically, that I was speaking about before I became in knowledge about stuff, I would say that the benchmark was set by Cole Palmer going. He was starting a bit. He went for about, was it 34 million quid? I'm trying to remember. 34
more than that,
quid,
I think.
Maybe. Yeah,
might have been 45. I could be wrong,
but basically he was the cusp. How do you value youth, right? As long as the player's young enough, and this is the thing where it works against Danilo. He's not super young anymore, but when players are very young and they've got a huge amount of potential, how can you put a price on that? And it's really, from a legal perspective, you've got to prove that the value that you've made is wrong. So you've got to, the onus is on those trying to prove you wrong rather than you yourself in the legal world, as it were. But if you've got precedents of a Cole Palmer who after one season's worth about 100 million quid, then selling a player for 35 million quid who's very young you could say that it's perfectly reasonable to do that because he has got the potential to be absolutely awesome. But so it does get more difficult as they get older.
Are you saying that there's people out there, a governing transfer body out there that's going to be saying, you can't sell him for that much. He's not worth that much. Isn't it?
Head of legal, Premier League. Head of legal, Premier League is not happy.
If a buying club buys Danilo for 35 million that Forest set, then they're happy to pay the 35 million and there's no rules being broken. Surely it's a deal between two parties, isn't it? Are there rules out there that say you have to follow strict guidance on the fees you set?
No, it's fair market value. It's a good question. And so you have to be able to trade at what is called arm's length pricing, which is fair market value. This is a lot of related to Man City's 112 charges that are going on at the moment, right? Now, again, like we talked about loans having to be put in at fair market value for the interest that there, it's the same when you're selling a player. Now, you're going to have some grey area in terms of what is that fair value. And that's why I was talking about it's very difficult to price youth players and young players because it's very difficult to price potential. But the wiggle room becomes less on that actual how do you value player, because there's more and more data, there's more and more that you can use to narrow that band of what actually the price should be when you sell a player.
He's played Premier League games. He's got lots of experience under his belt. His comp is ex-player from last year. He went for that kind of figure, which is why we value him at that figure, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it gets more challenging, but you can, and I do expect to see more, let's just call them PSR swaps. That's probably a quite neutral term to call them without being too inflammatory. For what are younger players that are out of the academy and have not, like a McAtee, he is not fully established first team player, right? Man City have done what they always do, is play youth players right at the end of the season to pump the value a bit. This is what they're doing at the moment.
Okay. Next slide for you, Raf.
Yeah. Okay. So if we actually then try and look in the crystal ball and go, right, we're about to start next season. What does that mean? Okay. Where are we going to be? Now, the 80 million for 24-25 of loss, I've assumed the fact that we scrape over the line. Okay. It could be a better situation than that, but this is just working on the assumption we scrape over the line. Okay. So on that basis, we probably, if you look at the 29 million that we made this year that just finished, we probably make 80 million loss in this year that's about to finish now, which means for the 105, if you work it out, we probably can lose next year for 54 million quid, right? Give or take. Now, again, if the bonus is, but it's probably about 50 more million quid, right? So to that end, now it can't really get much worse than the 80 million quid this year, because we'll do whatever I assume we'll do whatever we take to get inside the line of PSR. But if it's better because we sell a bit more this season before the 30th of June, or commercial went through the roof, or there's something that's happening, that 80 becomes a bit less in terms of losses, and the 54 becomes less in terms of or more rather in terms of the actual loss that we can make. But again, if you're comparing the 80 that we're making this year to the 54 that we can only make next year, again, there is a gap, right? We need a boost of 26 million quid from how we've got over the line this year to next year. See, it's getting tougher every single year, even though everything's going. We need to find more money every single time because we're improving the squad. The costs are rising within the club. Okay. Now, if we look at Newcastle and Villa, when they went to Europe for the first time, they really struggled in the league while they were running their European campaigns the first time, and they finished mid-table. So if we do that, we probably lose about 15 million quid compared to what we would get if we finished sixth this year. Okay. So you already need to find 26 million. You now need to find another 15 million to cover your lower league position at the end of next year. But you would hope, because we're in Europe and our current sponsorship 2-year deal, I think, if I'm correct, ends at the end of this season, if I'm not mistaken. New sponsor, and we're in Europe. So, cha-ching, if we negotiate this well, this should be big payday, right? Very, very quickly, hot off the presses, not to hammer Man U again, but to give you an idea of sponsorship deals. So, sponsorship deal, Adidas, Man U was $1.1 billion over 10 years, which is about, I sent it to you guys. What was it? About 80 million quid or something in pounds a year, I think it is. Now, to give you an idea of not being in Europe, or actually they think that the club's on the decline, that's a 30% reduction on what they were getting beforehand from Adidas, right? But at the same time, that's still 80 million quid a year for Adidas, for Man U. Now, we're not at those levels, but there's nothing to say that we can't go up if we actually keep Europe a bit and get a really good sponsor. For now, I think reasonable, estimate about 15 million quid. That nets off the poor finishing position pretty much. So we're back to the 26 million. Now, this is where Percy's article yesterday blew everything up, and everyone suddenly assumed we're buying 5 players for 30, 35 million quid a piece. We're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. That's simply not happening, right? Unless we'll come on to a scenario, Marinakis bets the house again, like he did when we got promoted. If we got relegated, by the way, the wheels would have come off the club completely. He bet on us staying up and invested. He might do the same. I wouldn't advise it as a financial person, but he does what he likes. Okay, so if we have a look at this to demystify the impact of buying these players, right? The McAtees. Who was in that list? There was like a McAtee. There was
Hayes Fernandez, Delap, I think.
Yep, Delap. We had that the left back. What was his name?
Oh, Too Fair.
Yep, exactly right. So if we think about them, is it outside the realms of possibility that so Delap we know would cost 30 million quid? McAtee would be about 30 million quid, maybe with a bit of a PSR nudge, swap nudge, whatever it might be. Okay, so we're talking around about 30 million quid for these players that we're going shopping for. Say we get 3 of them in, we put them on 5-year contracts, and again, Forest don't like 5-year contracts. The Artas of the world have burnt our hands so badly that we put huge distrust in 5-year contracts, but we have seen them come in a bit more to be able to deal with finances. So 5-year contract, 70 million, say 70 grand a week wages, right? A lot of who we've got on are about 50, but they go up to about 100 at the top end of our wage structure. So we're talking players that are coming in that we think are going to improve our 11, or at least be as good as our 11 for bench options. That feels to me about 70k a week type of fees that are coming, wages that are in there. So you work out for just 3 of those players on that, £30 million for a player, give them 70k a week. That is going to cost us every year of that contract £29 million, right? Now, that is before I've added in agency fees, signing bonuses, employer national insurance contributions, loyalty bonuses, expenses, performance bonuses that are contingent, right? All of that is extra on top of that 29 million quid, right? That we could count. You can calculate some of it. Some of it is in the unknown, right? Nicks, you know what they're going to be, right? But the rest of it is much of a guesswork. So 29 is on the low side of what that's going to cost you. Now, given the fact that we need to find 26 million quid next year as well, we're netting off probably the sponsorship with a worse finishing position and be mid-table. We now need to find about 55 million quid more next season if we get in those 3 players. Now, we'll probably get more than 3, but I do think we're probably selling some of the squad to make the room. So I'm balancing off the other 2 that come in with the savings that we get. Probably 8 players going out give us the saving of the 2 players that are 2 or 3 players that are coming in that are really good. So I haven't done all the players that are coming in, but we're looking at a net, probably those 3 players of roughly how it works. Now, this is where Danscape came in. He's got a great article that he published, and he's going to be doing a little bit of a session like this on talking about Europe and money, right? Of actually what can we expect revenue-wise and the different variabilities. But he reckons if we do sneak into, it's still a possibility, we need to win this weekend. But if we do, it's still possible. And that is big cash. We're talking about 47 million quid just for turning up. Mega. And then
Champions League, right?
Yeah, Champions League. This is Champions League. 47 million quid for just turning up. Then, depending on how we perform through the group stages, etc., just for doing poorly in the group stages, we'll probably get about 2.5 million quid. That can ratchet up to doing pretty much how Villa did, I would say, and giving you another 30 million quid. Now, you can see 50 million quid sorted in that scenario, pretty much. Even at the bad case scenario, we're pretty much there. There'll be some loans and other things that we need to do and sort it out in the network of Marinakis that will get it sorted, right? But Europa League, I have not put on here, because again, when I was doing these slides, it wasn't Conference League, but if Man City do beat Palace we're in the Europa League. So let's just keep our positive mental attitude on. We're in the Europa League. Okay. So that will get us 25 million quid guaranteed. Okay. So that sorts the gap, but that doesn't sort the new players, right, of revenue. Then performance-wise, we would hope we would smash the European League, especially if we're getting these new players in and become a better side, better in possession, etc., then maybe get to the semis. So again, performance-wise, ratchets from about 1.6 million pounds to about 10 million quid, but you'd hope we'd be more at that end of a 10 million quid. Add the two of those together, you're at about 30, maybe at the top end, about 35 million quid. So you can see the massive, it's a big difference between the two competitions, but 35 million quid is better than nothing, right? It's definitely better than nothing that we've got. Now, the other question that we've got is, as I mentioned, with the players that we get in, we have to take that cost every single year to the P&L, profit and loss, to our accounts. But if we don't get back into Europe, these monies go away, right? So it's a one-off that we've got for these, right? So now we come on to the final slide, which is then theory casting, right? This is huge finger in the air for next year, but I've come up with effectively 4 different scenarios. So for this year finishing, I think we're very close to the line. We can fudge it with some Marinakis group activity, selling some fringe players early, maybe a bit of increase of commercial merchandising this year that is a surprise that's coming through. We'll get there. Next year, what do we need to do? So, as you can see, scenario A, the universe provides, and we get into the Champions League. And next year we play in the Champions League. We are sorted financially. Don't need to do anything. Again, a little bit of a wiggle if we don't do very well in the Champions League, but we should be okay. Then, if we don't get Champions League, we get Europa League this season, but we finish top 6 again. So we don't lose that 15 million quid. Okay. Then also with some extra commercial revenue that we'll get while being in Europe, that should scrape us over the line in terms of PSR next season as well, right? As a combo in that option B. Option C, we get Conference League. Boo. But we get top 6 again. And this summer, late on, we actually sell reasonably. So some of your Danilos and some others that do have decent. So it's not your crown jewels. It's not your Morgan Gibb Whites and your Murillos, but you're selling players to rotate and improve your squad that potentially could start, but they're not your crown jewels. You're going to have to do a bit of selling of that, and then you're probably okay next season. But the key is getting top 6 again if we get Conference League, and then we still need to sell, right? That's the difference for the Conference League. Now, if we get the Conference League and we get distracted and we don't come top 6 next year, we're kind of in the middle, then this is where we start seeing the crown jewels having to be sold effectively to be able to keep this wage bill going of the players that we got in to do what we wanted to do. You'll see a big sale, and it might be, and we will do another pod on if Morgan Gibbs White gets sold, when he gets sold, as it were, and the reasons why I think he'll get sold this summer rather than next summer makes sense to me. But again, early or late this summer, January or next summer, early, can't be late. And that's the key. So if you're selling a huge profit player, we cannot be in the Brennan situation again, right? Of being, or if you see, how did we get Anderson, right? The godsend that is Anderson. It's because Newcastle hit a wall and they were taken to ransom effectively for 2 players, Minter as well, for way under probably what they should have been sold for, right? And that's because they were selling right at the end of the window, okay? Right? And they were up against, or rather trying to sell at the end of their PSR, trying to get to PSR to June. And again, you get to the end of the window, you're trying to sell early, you're going to get absolutely, I don't want to use the word, but screwed, right? Really badly. So if you're going to sell that crown jewel, you've got to do it this summer ahead of knowing that you might have a problem next summer, and do it in your own time, not be rushed by PSR to June, not be held to ransom, and get the full value like we eventually did for Brennan Johnson, even though we then took the 4 points hit. So we don't want to take the 4 points hit next season. That's why the big crown jewel, they may de-risk. I don't think that'll happen. That's not a Marinakis. But it might happen because we sell Morgan Gibbs White, but I think it's in the summer. Anyway, Those are the different scenarios for next year, depending on where we get into Europe, where we finish, and those types of things. But at the end of the day, I'm very proud of the club, right? Of how we posted a profit last financial year, right? It was amazing work by the transfer team, right? Really amazing work. They could still do a lot of good. We are not out of the woods, but we are not up a creek without a paddle. We have great assets. We're getting into some form of Europe. There is an uptrend, but we cannot just go and spank a load of money on a load of players. We are not buying Cunha's. We are not buying Gyökeres or whatever he's called. We're not buying those players. We simply cannot. And we're not paying wages that are more than 100K a week, right? It just doesn't work for the model that hopefully you now feel a bit more comfortable having seen all of this, where we are as a club as Forest, okay, at the moment for this season finishing and next season.
Fantastic. Raf, really clear and concise and actually really interesting. I think for people like me that perhaps think, oh my God, I'm not going to understand any of this, that was really clear. And no, I mean, I think it's important for anyone watching or listening that this kind of thing actually, when it's simplified, can make sense. And ultimately, that's what you've done. I think this is in my head the big question, and then you touched on it as well. I think we will sell Gibbs White this summer. I think he's the crown jewel that's going to go. And we should all remember that was always going to be the case. These players that we brought in, that we fall in love with, that do great things for our club, we have them for a period of time because there's a bigger picture and a much bigger things going on. We've been really, really fortunate to have had such a fantastic season, and Morgan Gibbs White has contributed to that. And he's just been shortlisted along with Chris Wood for the Premier League Player of the Season, which in my mind is amazing. But I'm surprised that Morgan Gibbs White was nominated. I really am surprised. I think he's brilliant. I think he's been brilliant. But to overlook the likes of Milenkovic or Aina, for me, who haven't even made nominations for Team of the Season, and Matt Dales hasn't made it as well, it just is a bit mind-blowing. But that's another podcast, and we'll talk about that tomorrow when we do the preview for West Ham coming up. But it does put money on his shoulders. It does say to Pep and Man City, look, if you want to buy Morgan Gibbs White, you're coming to us for a chap who's had an outstanding season, who has been nominated for player of the season. He may well end up in the team of the season. It feels to me that with everything you've said and described there, that this would be a sensible time to make that sale. As much as I don't want it to happen, I'm at peace with the fact that we are going to have to sell players at certain points. And the smart thing to do is to get the timing right, I think, and maximize it for the good of the club, because there are other players out there who will do great things for our club as well. And it will sting to see Morgan in a Man City shirt. But it stung for me when Mikel Antonio left. He was the last player that left the club that really stung, because I loved him so much. And that was 7, 8, 9 years ago, whatever it was. And so it happens. You fall in love with players, but they go. But it's about maximizing his value for the club. And I think that that's what will happen. So just very quickly, Raf, let's say we sell Morgan. What kind of figure, realistically, with your expertise, do you think the club are going to would get for him? And just very quickly, how does that change? What's the figure, and how does that change the forecast?
Right. Okay.
I know that's not a quick answer. I get that.
Right. Okay. So very, very quickly in my head. By the way, Morgan Gibbs White getting nominated and no Man City player getting nominated as well. That really helps with adding about another 5 to 10 million quid, I think, on his set. But I still think it sits around 80 million quid, right? The England caps, his ability, how he fits into a Man City side, which is actually probably better than us, of him being able to sit and just spray passes all around with all the possession that we have. Like it just works, right? And I think it's about 80 million quid. Now, if we do a swap for McAtee, then if he's valued at, say, 25 to 30, I think we get a PSR swap going on. So I think there is a premium that both the players are then nudged up by about 5 to 10 million quid, maybe, which means that the headline figure for Morgan comes across as more like 90 million quid. Now, this is what I did. Let me have a quick look at Morgan now. Right. I've put in 35 million quid, right? Again, we don't know what the figure was for him being bought, because was it 25 up front and there was about 20 million quid of activations? Probably half of them have happened. We might, by selling him now, by the way, get out of some of those activations. So again, selling him saves us potentially 10 million quid that hasn't been activated as well, which is good. Now, if that's the case, then I reckon he's got about 15 million quid of unamortized just on his purchase, but you're going to have agency fees and stuff that's probably about another million quid that's on top of that are unamortized. So if you think about 16 million quid, but you're getting 90, that's awesome. That's 75 million quid's worth of profit. That totally sorts everything. But again, you don't want to do it until late this summer, because we can get over the line fine, and you want that to help us in the 3 years following. Even if we move to squad cost ratio, there is still a 3-year averaging factor that goes into squad cost ratio about player sales. So that's my, in a nutshell, why that's the impact that it will have and the size of the impact of all the numbers that we've talked about.
And that's where you get your player sales from as well, isn't it? Really, those players that we're talking about coming into the club. If let's say Morgan goes, because now there's two deadlines. We've got a PSR deadline, which no one was really working to until it seems last year. All of a sudden, everyone was like, their eyes were opened to this whole PSR thing. And we were working to, I think, the June 30th deadline, and that's when the Elliot Anderson deal and for the Codemos thing was happening. And that had to be done so that it counted for that financial year. And then anything else after that was going into the new financial year. So everyone's kind of thinking about timing. So if we do a Gibbs White sale for the figure you talked about, let's say right at the end of the traditional transfer window, that's money towards next year's figures. And then all of a sudden we're able to bring in the players, 2 or 3 players that we're talking about bringing in.
So yes and no. And this is where we get into really complicated territory, right? It's not good for us to sell him this summer before the 30th of June. We don't need...
No, it's got to be after. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Man City, if they get him, will want him for the World Club Cup, right? And early. So what we need to do is say, yes, but we need to do a financial fudge. We effectively just need to loan him to them until after the 30th of June. So we don't technically sell him until after there. And then everything is, in my eyes, kosher on the books. Absolutely fine. But they get Morgan early and we get it booked in the period that we want it booked in for the actual mega sale.
Yeah. Richard, we are out of time, but I know you probably got a couple of things you want to chuck in as well, mate.
I mean, he and I went over a lot of things last night, so I probably got a preview on a lot of things and asked a lot of questions already back. Because my question was, on some of these fringe players that probably they're good for depth, but they may provide some benefit to sell prior to the June 30th deadline. Like Raf mentioned, we'll be on the line and probably get over that just by a hair. So it's not so critical, but I'm just curious, and it'll be all dependent, obviously, as we talk in future podcasts about how we construct the squad, because there may be an opportunity to switch our formation a little bit, at least our base formation, and maybe with some different personnel. And so I was just curious, do you think there's any other players that come to mind, Raf, right away that maybe fill that like, just to make sure we don't potentially infringe on PSR violation right before? I mean, I'm just trying to think of some other players, because there's going to be some that are out of contract anyway, right?
Yeah. So what we can do, because I'm very aware of the time, is we can have some fun, which we will do on another episode, where we'll collectively just think of who's expendable, who's not expendable. Everyone that's expendable, I can run the numbers on those players, and we can look at what's the residual book value on all of them, and then we can figure out what could we roughly get for these players, who's worth selling, who's not worth selling, and it'll be a fun episode.
Yeah, because I think we were talking about Oman Bamadeli. I know we're at time, Rick, so I won't go on anymore. But yeah, like someone like Oman Bamadeli maybe getting purchased to Strasbourg or something like that. Yeah, so
Yeah,
Great.
He
Amazing.
either gets bought by Strasbourg or we sell him, because if he's not good enough for Strasbourg, he's not good enough for us. So they either want him or we sell him.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic.
Cool. Guys, honestly, thank you so much. I'm super geek when it comes to data and finance and everything else as well. So I apologize for having gone on for an hour on stuff that some people will find really, really boring. But again, you don't have to watch the pod, and you can fast forward through bits and looks at the slides, the bits that you find. If you want PSR stuff, then hopefully you fast forwarded to the end. I should have said
no, I'd say to anybody, I hope you've made it this far, because actually it was another fast hour, and actually it was great, and genuinely it was great. And we like to try and bring something different. We're lucky that we can lean on Raf's expertise, and then Danscape's going to be doing another follow-up episode as well. So we've got a team of people here that can bring you not just random kind of off the cuff facts and knowledge. We can bring you some expertise as well. So I hope you enjoyed that, watchers and listeners. Thank you very much, Raf. You're a star. Richard Spray, thank you very much. You're a legend. We'll be back to do the West Ham preview. We'll be live for that one. But yeah, we hope you've enjoyed this look at Forest's financials. We'll see you very soon.
Come join Greg and Richard right here.